What if the comforting stories we tell ourselves about progress are the very lies that keep us asleep? What if the world you were born into is not rising, but quietly collapsing? Look around you. The noise, the speed, the machines, the endless promises of a better tomorrow. And yet, something feels missing. Something feels weaker. Something feels hollow. If history moves in cycles, if civilizations grow old like men do, then what stage are we in right now? Are we living in the final strength of an age, or in the soft decay that comes before the fall? And more importantly, what does this say about you? The answers were explored by the German thinker Oswald Spengler, and they might upset you a bit, because what he saw says a lot about you and about your generation. He saw men getting weaker, and when men grow weaker, civilizations begin to fall. But why is this happening? How did we get here? That is what I am going to explore in this video, through the eyes of Oswald Spengler. Spengler's first cause of the downfall of men is the urban overthrow of traditional culture. He describes how a small number of vast metropolises, what he calls world cities, rise at the expense of the countryside, tearing people away from the soil and from ancient ways of life. In one of his most vivid lines, he writes, "The giant city sucks the country dry, insatiably and incessantly demanding and devouring fresh streams of men till it wearies and dies in the midst of an almost uninhabited waste of country." This image captures the paradox of modernity perfectly. Cities overflow with wealth, opportunity, and intellect, yet they feed on the fertility, labor, and quiet wisdom of the countryside until even the land itself grows barren. The children of the city, the cosmopolitan intellectual class, become what Spengler calls culture men, detached from nature, shaped by the city, turned into its creature, its executive organ, and ultimately, its victim. At this stage of history, Spengler observed that reason and machines come to rule over folklore and instinct. The world city brings cosmopolitanism in place of home, cold matter-of-fact in place of reverence for tradition and age, scientific irreligion as a fossil of the older religion of the heart, society in place of the state. Here, loyalty to family, faith, and local custom is slowly replaced by a universal market mentality. Life becomes abstract. Existence is measured in money, productivity, and economic value. Human beings are severed from the fruitful earth and the primitive values that once grounded their sense of meaning and belonging. This transformation turns people into an anonymized mass with no shared folk identity. Spengler writes, "To the world city belongs not a folk, but a mass. Its uncomprehending hostility to all the traditions representative of the culture, nobility, church, privileges, dynasties, convention in art, and limits of knowledge in science, and the keen, cold intelligence that confounds the wisdom of the peasant." In other words, the city man comes to despise the spiritual wisdom of his ancestors, dismissing it as backward or naive. In its place, he embraces efficiency, progress, calculation, and consumption. The old ideals and beloved customs of rural life, the gymnasium, village festivals, reverence for the earth and the seasons, lose their meaning. Spengler even notes that the smaller the town, the less its people care for the avant-garde art, abstract science, and brainy ideas of the great cities. These things only truly belong to the megalopolitan mind. History offers clear examples of this pattern. Spengler points out how, in the age of Augustus, Romans turned Greece into a kind of cultural theme park. In depopulated Athens, the mob of parvenu tourists from Rome gaped at the works of the Periclean age with as little understanding as the American globetrotter in the Sistine Chapel. The very symbols of Greek cultural greatness were bought, stripped of their meaning, and overshadowed by foreign power. They were replaced by Roman buildings, colossal and arrogant, by the side of the low and modest structures of the old time. 20th century Western cities mirror this same pattern. Even when Spengler was writing in 1918, Western intellectuals were already living inside an emerging global cosmopolitan order. And today, as one modern observer asks, has universal cosmopolitanism consumed the modern world, thus causing fertility to fall? Has our intellect failed us? For Spengler, this loss of roots, the severing of man from soil, tradition, and inherited meaning, is not a small cultural shift. It is the first deep wound in the downfall of men. The second fatal cause of the downfall of men, according to Spengler, is demographic collapse, the sterility of civilized man living under a hardened, soulless way of life. He famously predicted that the moment a society begins to seriously question whether it should have children at all, life itself has begun to lose its instinctive urgency. In village cultures, birth and upbringing are natural facts of existence. A peasant's work and way of life are rooted in continuity and generations. But in a highly developed civilization, cold reasoning replaces instinct. Spengler warns, children do not happen, because intelligence at the peak of intensity can no longer find any reason for their existence. When the ordinary thought of a highly cultivated people begins to regard having children as a question of pros and cons, the great turning point has come. For nature knows nothing of pro and con. When reasons have to be put forward at all in a question of life, life itself has become questionable. Under urban consumerist conditions, the family steadily shrinks. The image of the father of many children becomes rare, even something quietly mocked in polite city society. Self-interest, career ambition, contraception, and the belief that economic and environmental pressures make large families irresponsible all work together to suppress birth rates. Spengler chillingly foresaw that every civilization eventually enters a stage of appalling depopulation, in which the whole pyramid of cultural man vanishes. The best blood has incontinently poured into the towns, merely to bolster them up for a while. The result is a civilization that grows smaller and older, sacrificing its young and creative energies to preserve the comfort of an aging elite. Today, this sounds uncomfortably prophetic. Industrialized nations, from Japan, with a total fertility rate of around 0.8, to much of Europe and North America, have fallen far below replacement level. One modern commentator puts it even more starkly. The entire world is heading off a demographic cliff. If a civilization doesn't produce the next generation, it dies. The collapse of the family has immediate cultural consequences. Traditions are no longer passed down, skills are forgotten, and growing numbers of people live as unrelated, isolated individuals detached from any sense of lineage or inheritance. The sterility of civilized man. Children do not happen, not because children have become impossible, but principally because intelligence at the peak of intensity can no longer find any reason for their existence. The third great cause of the downfall of men, in Spengler's view, is political degeneration, which culminates in what he famously calls Caesarism. When a culture's creative age comes to an end, democracy and the rule of money hollow out public life and prepare the ground for autocracy. Spengler traces this pattern across history. The free Greek city-states gave way to the Hellenistic monarchies and ended in Roman Caesarism. Medieval Christendom dissolved into absolutist monarchies and revolutions. In every case, once new spiritual and cultural energies dried up, politics became dominated by wealth and spectacle, and the age of the Caesar emerged. As Spengler puts it, Caesarism grows on the soil of democracy, which is dictatorial money economics. A plutocratic democracy, ruled in practice by wealth, inevitably exhausts itself and clears the path for a single strong man to seize control. Under Caesarism, politics no longer move people through ideals or shared purpose. It becomes a naked contest of power. Spengler expresses this with brutal clarity. With the accomplished state of Caesarism, high history lays itself down weary to sleep. Man becomes a plant again, dumb and enduring. In other words, when a civilization submits to brute authoritarianism, its people lose their inner freedom and historical will. They remain alive, but they no longer shape history. They take root where they stand, stripped of growth, voice, and direction. The political stage is dominated by a tiny elite, the superior heads, who make the real decisions behind closed doors, while the masses are mobilized only symbolically. Spengler describes Rome in this late stage. Though Republican forms still existed, the decisions, in fact, lie elsewhere. A small number of superior heads settle everything, while below them are the great mass of second-rate politicians, selected through a provincially conceived franchise to keep alive the illusion of popular self-determination. Caesarism, then, is democracy emptied of substance by money and mass culture. Rule for the few, while the many are pacified with spectacle, distraction, and comfort. The modern parallels are unsettling. When economic inequality becomes extreme and trust in institutions collapses, societies become vulnerable to authoritarian solutions. Spengler interpreted the rise of Lenin, Mussolini, and eventually Hitler as manifestations of this Caesarist phase. The West's desperate attempt to impose order after democracy and liberal capitalism had exhausted their creative force. In our own time, echoes of this pattern appear in the rule of technocratic elites, surveillance states, and corporate dominance, all of which resemble late-stage forms of Spengler's Caesarism. As politics hardens into administration and control, human initiative withers. Philosophy and art retreat into the private amusements of a megalopolitan elite, while the masses grow passive, entertained rather than engaged. Thus, man's public life ends not in heroic struggle, but in quiet forcelessness. Civic virtue is replaced by placid endurance. For Spengler, this is the tragic final act once the creative will of a culture has run dry. The last scene in which Western man remains alive, but no longer truly historical, reduced to a dumb and enduring existence. Intellectual and spiritual exhaustion is the fading of the creative soul and the loss of belief that once gave life its purpose and vitality. In the early stages of a culture, people live with wonder, destiny, and heroic ideals. But in the late phase of civilization, life is reduced to calculation, convenience, and superficial pleasure. Spengler famously observed that in this stage, all values are measured by money and statistics. Once wealth becomes the yardstick of life, art, religion, and genuine culture atrophy. He writes, "To the culture belong gymnastics, the tournament, the agon, and to the civilization belongs sport. This is the true distinction between the Hellenic palaestra and the Roman circus." In practice, this means the soul of a people falls asleep. The Faustian man who once sought unity with the infinite now marvels only at skyscrapers, screens, or the fleeting excitement of entertainment. Creative energy is replaced by amusement, and heroism gives way to distraction. Underlying this decline is a suffocating scientism and materialism. Spengler observed that scientific irreligion, seeing the universe as nothing but matter and mechanism, had replaced the inner religion of meaning, devotion, and myth. In the absence of spiritual guidance, technological marvels and bureaucratic routines become the highest achievements. Art itself becomes a performance for connoisseurs rather than a profound expression of the human spirit. As he writes, art itself becomes a sport, played before a highly intelligent audience of connoisseurs. Creativity loses its soul, leaving behind cleverness without depth. We see this today in education, media, and modern life. Whereas the age of Goethe and Nietzsche demanded total engagement with life, the age of Weber, Marx, or today's corporate technocratic society settles for abstract theory, order, and routine. As Benedict XVI later reflected on Spengler's work, Western civilization has achieved technological and material progress without a corresponding spiritual renewal. Men and women become non-essential, living lives of routine, convenience, and safety, stripped of the heroic drive that once gave human existence depth and meaning. For Spengler, these four forces, urban alienation, demographic collapse, Caesarism, and spiritual exhaustion, reinforce one another. From our connection to the land, to family, to faith, to freedom, every supporting pillar of Western life erodes in parallel. The outcome is inevitable. Civilization coasts toward decay, not with sudden catastrophe, but through gradual entropy. He sums this like this: high history lays itself down weary to sleep.